All right, I think we're live now. Testing.
There you go.
I'm waiting for it to come up on YouTube. I have YouTube pulled up. It means nothing until I see it on here.
I see it.
You see it? Okay, well then we're live. You just got to catch up. Hello. Sorry, I've just sat here for a while pretending like we weren't live. Oh, it just came to mind. Cool. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Near Mint Book Club. This week we're Sans Alana, which means that I got to really up my energy. Today we got, as always, we got Mandy, who is there.
Yeah.
First ever returning guest, Chris Hacker from the Oblivion Bar podcast. How you doing, Chris?
Hello, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back on.
And this week we're reading. I was going to pull up my iPad, but I can actually just do this.
Yeah. Jeez, Tommy. We have to be cool with physicals.
Yeah, but hold on.
Gotta get that physical media out.
Or way to take we all hold it up and then
Someone can screenshot that.
screenshot it. And then,
Why'd you pull it away?
Yeah. Your idea, and then you.
remind to get not in the light. Okay, this is
I think it's good.
God Country. Johnny Cates and Jeff Shaw.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we usually start with a quick synopsis. First of all, thank you everyone who's watching so far. Synopsis for this one is kind of interesting. There is an older gentleman who really loves a sword. Just crazy about this sword. But the only problem is it's someone else's sword, I think, is how that works. But the sword has a voice, and the sword says, I don't like that other guy. I think I'd rather stay with you. And then hijinks is really the end all of that. And it's really about, is it really about the sword? Probably not.
No, it's not. They even say in the book that it's not really about the sword.
So that's God Country. What else do you guys want to talk about now?
Oh, goodness. Well, I wanted to start off this by pretty much, one, the story, God Country, is about, in my opinion, not to get too serious too quickly, but if you talk to people who have experienced Alzheimer's, whether it be a family member or a close friend or whoever, they'll tell you that a lot of times they just wish they could get one more day with them. Yeah. And this is the story where Roy, the son of Emmett's the one, the grandfather or father in the story who obtains Valifax, the sword. It's pretty much him getting one more day with his dad.
Yeah.
So that's what I really think the story's about. But also, before we go on to God Country, I wanted to quickly talk about last episode of Near Mint Book Club, where you guys had Kyle Higgins on. And I just want to share a quick story because it's really funny. It's not very long at all. But
the book club cinematic universe that we got going.
Exactly. So I wanted to firstly say that I love the episode with Kyle. I thought, like we talked about before here, I thought he was very interesting to hear talk about not only the story, but his, role in the comic industry and how much he's learned over time. But I wanted to share a moment when I first met Kyle. I think it was CTV2 2018, and I was really enjoying his Winter Soldier run that he had, the 4-issue miniseries. And I remember at the very beginning of that Winter Soldier series, and why I approached him at that Comic-Con was because Bucky is from Shelbyville, Indiana, which is where I'm from. It's a weird flyover city in the middle of Indiana. There's no significance to it whatsoever. There's actually like 7 or 8 Shelbyvilles in the US. So it was so interesting that Jack Kirby and Roy Thomas picked this as the birthplace for Bucky Barnes. So I went up to Kyle, and some of the story that Kyle wrote takes place in Shelbyville. I went up to Kyle at the Comic-Con and I was like, "Hey, Kyle, I love this Winter Soldier. I'm a huge fan of your Nightwing run. Quick question though. Why did Jack Kirby decide, why did he decide Winter Soldier have his like hometown be in Shelbyville, Indiana?" And Kyle's the look on his face was like, "Dude, I don't know. I just assumed that he knew through his research." He's like, "I know as much as you do. I just literally put it in the story because that's the history of the character." And obviously the story doesn't mean as much without getting a visual of Kyle's face, but the look on his face was like, "Why are you asking me this? And how do you expect me to know this?" So I just want to share that little moment. Again, like you talked about, I owe Kyle a ton because he's part of the reason why I became a Wednesday Warrior with his Nightwing run. So I just thought that was funny and just wanted to share that I enjoyed the last episode.
Yeah. Someone tweet us at Kyle. We'll get him watching it. Now that you've mentioned that, now I have to ask, since it is Shelbyville, was that, you just said there were 7 or 8 of them or something like that in the country. Is that why the neighboring town of Springfield and The Simpsons is Shelbyville?
Yeah, because there's an actual Shelbyville, Illinois.
Cool.
So yeah, and there's, like I said, there are so many in the U.S. It's so funny that, again, Jack Kirby decided that was going to be Bucky's hometown. I still don't know why. So if anyone finds out, please let me know.
Maybe he just like looked up most common town name and just picked that like they did for The Simpsons.
Yeah, maybe. So anyway, go ahead. Mandy, did you have any thoughts on what you thought God Country was about?
No, I think similar to what you were saying. I think in the beginning, yeah, it feels a little bit more like a myth, like fantasy, I guess is the right kind of way you would put it. And so like it definitely had those elements, and it seemed like it was going to be this like kind of like raw action, and it definitely had that. But there's like, and I mean, we're getting a little bit spoilery, so if you've not read it and you care about spoilers, you'll need to leave.
Go to the hand.
But yeah, when you get to the nearish the end, I think like as he's dying, and there's like the splash page where it's like all the memories coming back. I think that's like where it really kind of hit. And I'm a big sap. I get real emotional, like taking in any kind of media. Even if it's not sad, I get sad, like good sad, all the sads. But I definitely got real emotional, and I'm not, I guess now I'm thinking about like my great grandparents, I think, had like Alzheimer's, but I was so young that it didn't really affect me too much. But yeah, it's just that moment where you kind of see, and I think like him expressing just what he wanted his son to remember, right? And not so much the like final moments maybe leading up to where he was more like kind of angry and couldn't really remember anyone. And so I was like, I just felt like that was a beautiful moment and kind of wrapped up, like you said, like what the story really was about at its core, and just wanting to give him like that one last thing that they could experience and have together. So I don't know. It's been a book that's been on my shelf for a while. It was actually gifted to me. And I just kept putting it off. I guess I just kept thinking, okay, yeah, like when I'm in the mood for a fantasy type or like, I guess like mythological a little bit too. So I was like, oh, I'll wait till I'm in the mood for that. So like this was the perfect, reason for me to just pick it up and suck it up instead of putting it off, waiting for that right mood as I always do. But I'm glad I read it. It's definitely not what I was expecting.
Yeah, I meant to say this a minute ago, but one of my favorite things about not only Donny Cates, but God Country itself is that it's a very simple story. It's not something that you have to have a lot of, knowledge about prior to what happened in this moment in the story here of God Country. The best thing that Donny does with a lot of his stories, not just God Country, but, Baby Teeth or even Venom, Buzzkill, all these different stories that he's done, is that he takes a simple idea and he like focuses on one emotion or one thought. A lot of times writers will put themselves in their stories. And I think Donny's been, widely, he's said that to many people, that a lot of times he'll just take a part of himself and put it in that story. And this story, it's also one of those rare stories where you don't have to, you could know spoilers. We could spoil this entire book for you, but it's not really about what happens. It's about, experiencing the story as you read it. So I just love that. I love that about Donny, with him also making it very simple. Everything is always like also weirdly like balls to the wall insane as well. Everything is over the top hardcore. So it really helps that balance to, it'd be crazy if he was going like off the wall, cosmic Ghost Rider crazy. And then also there needing to be a bunch of this like detail and, a lot of backstory. He just keeps it bare minimum with his storylines. And I really appreciate it about him and how he can make it work.
So I love that it's a wrapped up 6-issue story. Like it doesn't need a lot. Sorry, Tom, I cut you off.
No, it's okay. No, I was gonna say I like that it felt so complete to the point where I almost thought maybe it's just because my mind always goes to twist endings or something, that I almost thought that this was going to be like one of those moments where the whole story was like not real and that it was like somehow in someone's head or something, and it was just like I don't know. I can't finish the story myself by saying this comparison, but I kind of felt like because it was like so there's such a gripping story going on that, and then the ending was like clearly about something else. Like while it was getting closer towards the end, I was kind of thinking that it was going to pull back, and like some of the fantasy elements would have been like not real or exaggerated for whatever reason. But also I kind of like that it wasn't that. No, it actually was all fantasy and whatnot. Yes, maybe that's just where my mind goes when I read stuff like this. But I did genuinely think at one point that it was gonna like pull back and that would be like in the hospital somewhere. And
yeah, like you said, I'm glad he didn't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Can I quickly make a comparison that might seem really weird until I explain it?
Yeah, I do that all the time.
God Country to me reminds me a lot of The Big Lebowski, because it's similar to The Big Lebowski. What happens in that movie is not really important, or like what happens after it or before it. The story is about Jeff Lebowski and his role in this weird, like he kind of gets thrown in the middle of this like weird war happening in LA. And in the end, he just is the same guy. It's his story. The whole thing is centered around him. And also the Sam Elliott narration. I don't know if you guys, during the book, there was this overarching narration, but at the beginning and end of each chapter, I was reading that in my head as Sam Elliott. I don't know if you guys are doing that too, but I just, every time I was like, this is really like aesthetically pleasing to me in my mind when I'm reading it as Sam. So in the same, what's that?
They do that for all the characters. Everyone's just Sam Elliott.
Right, exactly.
My granddaughter.
You know, God Country is the same thing. And they make light of it. And that's what made me think of this, is that this story is about Emmett, Quinlan, and even Roy to a certain extent. It's their story. It's not about the gods that they encounter. It's not about Valifax, the Blade. It's about his family. It's about Roy coming to grips with the relationship that he had with his father, which was trying, if not present for most of his life, and how they talk about it whenever, I think it's Deanna, she talks about how she loves having her grandfather back, and he comments and goes, who he is right now with the Blade is not who he was when I knew him before he got Alzheimer's. So I just found that really interesting.
I was kind of wondering.
Granddaughter thing was. Go ahead.
I was kind of wondering, like, what did this like? I feel like I keep going back to like trying to make the fantasy parts kind of represent real life and real sickness. But in my mind, when I was reading, I was like, what does the sword represent when it comes to Alzheimer's? Because on Chris's point, like in my mind, it was kind of like the sword and fighting all the gods was like someone with Alzheimer's saying that they would literally fight a god for one more chance to like be back to normal. But also like him with the sword isn't normal anymore. You know, like there was no way for, and like even if he killed the gods, he couldn't just like throw down the sword and be normal again. So I was trying to just piece together like what is the fights with the gods that could possibly relate back to real life. My English major hat on again, I guess is what I'm doing here. Yeah, because I was just wondering like how, like I guess in my mind I was wondering where it would go from there if he beat the gods and got to keep the giant sword, but also how does that relate to the metaphor of Alzheimer's, even though it's a very real Alzheimer's, but I feel like the metaphor of fighting gods to get over your Alzheimer's.
Well, I think as English major, I'm also an English major as well. Yeah. A lot of times we're taught to read like a writer and not like a reader. And we are always looking for that metaphor, that what's the overarching theme. And I think we found it. I'm not even sure that the sword itself means anything. I think it's just a bipartisan of the actual story and how like, you know, him being himself again, that's just like a part of that. So to search for what Valifax actually means, we probably would have to go to Donnie and Jeff themselves and see what they think. But to the same thought that you're having here, I honestly don't know if there really was a real, like, honest metaphor for the Blade itself. I think it's more about the action that the Blade was giving him.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like a memory, maybe like the memory of who Emmett was is what the Blade is. I'm not sure, honestly.
Yeah, I think if you went to Donnie and asked him what it meant, he'd probably have a Kyle Higgins reaction. Just be like, sword, it's a giant sword. What do you want?
Yeah.
There doesn't need to be a reason.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I found it really interesting because I don't know if you guys are aware, but God Country recently was optioned for a movie through Legendary Pictures, and Donnie wrote the script. And listening to him talk about it, and this is a quote here that I'm just going to quickly read for you guys that I found from an interview with, I think, comicbook.com,
Okay.
where he says, and we can kind of elaborate on this.
Mhm.
The overarching theme of the series is the idea of a small family in Texas dealing with things beyond their control, whether it's an illness that they cannot control, a storm, or even a huge Kirby like God. It's a metaphorical extension of some core concept. It'll make more sense as readers start to follow along, but everything starts to end with the family. It's their story. So that's not, again, I don't want to pretend like it's my original idea, but when I said that this story is theirs, and like, who is it? Baelgrim and Arstis and Adam and Valifex, those are all just like, yeah, they're not even the real focal point of the story. It's more about Roy and his relationship with his father, Deanna and her, like her, idealizing her grandfather, even though she's never really known him. And then Janie and kind of her, like the wife, her, like, kind of like, she has this idea of who, what's his name? Emmett is throughout the story. And she doesn't really, and she like starts to come around, obviously, once Valifex restores his memory and such. But even her idea with him having the sword is tainted because it's not really who he is. So I don't know. Like I said, it's the Quinlans and their story more so than anyone else.
Yeah.
No. No, go ahead, Tommy.
Oh no, I noticed, I was wondering if it was, I mean, obviously it was intentional, but you mentioned in the quote, he said Kirby-like monsters. And I did notice that when they showed at the beginning of one of the issues, I think maybe like issue 4 it was, all of the art is like directly ripped from like 1970s, like New Gods and all that.
I think you even have like Kirby bubbles at one point.
Yeah.
Trying to think here.
Kirby Stones.
This comic book nerd showing through.
Yeah, like even you can kind of see a little bit here when Emmett is holding the sword there, the Kirby, what do they call them? Kirby dots?
Yeah.
Kirby Crackles?
Crackles is probably more accurate, yes.
Okay.
They're always present when he's holding the sword, and I think that's not an accident, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
It's funny. I kept just because, like, I know. I mean, obviously, Donnie writes Thor now, but like knowing how big of a fan he is of Thor and listening to him talk about, like on panels and stuff, about just being like the ultimate Thor fan, a little part of me kind of was like, okay, I could see you like with the weapon in it. And I think even he mentions in a part with like, I can't remember the Balgrim. Is that which one it was? One of the guys.
The son of death or whatever.
Okay.
Are you thinking of
like,
Arstis?
Maybe when he's like, he gets the sword, and then he's like, there's like a comment about him not being worthy of what it's meant for. I think there was like some sort of comment about worthiness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think it was the final battle with Adam. That you're thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, one of the guys, I couldn't remember which one it was, but yeah, he's just like, you can't. Like, you're not worthy of this. And so that just kind of reminded me a little bit. And I thought that was kind of cute. Like maybe back then, and I don't know, maybe he knew he was going to write Thor, or maybe just being a big fan, he kind of, maybe that's where part of the weapon itself being, like, maybe that's part of the reasoning. And it's not as deep as we might, like you said, like, you're like, it's probably just an item. But I was like, okay, I could see this. But like, too, like with what Tommy was saying about someone with Alzheimer's wanting maybe, or relating it to like would fight a god to have the ability to get back what they don't have anymore. Oh my God, now I've lost the tangent. I was so there, so close.
Come on, Mandy.
Ah, curses. I don't know. It was like just along with the worthiness, I think, back to it, right? It's the weapon, I think, showing like the battle I get. And now I still feel very lost on it, but like,
Well,
trying to
Adam
think-
at one point in their battle, Adam even says like, you think that you are special? Do you think that that Valfax actually chose you? He didn't. It's all random.
Yeah.
Like I am the true wielder of this blade. I'm the one who created it from a dying universe. Like, and the whole time, Emmett's like, I don't care.
Mhm.
The fact that I have my memories back, the thought of his wife, who I think Baelgrim uses at one point against him, which ends up being his demise, and the fact that he remembers his son and his granddaughter is what's important, you know. And it's something that I, you know, like we talked about, it's something someone who has Alzheimer's, they would give anything for that. They would give anything to just have that memory, whether it's good or bad. Like he even says at one point, he remembers his wife dying, and the fact, and although that's a bad memory, he's so happy that he has it back because it's his. You know.
And he totally does the Thor hammer grab thing at one point.
Yeah, he like
with like no explanation at all, besides the fact that that's totally what Thor does. So yeah, of course the hammer would come back to his hand.
Yeah, and I think it's Arceus at one point. He even has he has like a total Beta Ray Bill Stormbreaker at one point in the story, and then you see Emmett holding both Valfax and the Stormbreaker. You know, after he defeats Arceus, like. I love the OP-ness of Emmett and how he can just like kick anyone's ass with Valfax, but I would love to have at some point in the story seen him get knocked back a little bit. I would like to experience a little bit of failure. I think at one point Baelgrim has him on the ropes because he shows him the image of his wife, but for the most part, it's just Emmett destroying these gods.
Yeah.
And while that's not the focal point of the story, like we've talked about, it would have been really cool to see Emmett struggle a little bit. Again, maybe that's not the point. Maybe I'm completely missing it, and maybe I'm looking for more. I'm like grasping for straws, even though I love the story. But you know, to see him struggle a tad would have been nice. And I think if Donnie would have wrote the story today rather than back in 2017 when he was I think he was kind of a newish writer at that point. This is one of his first creator-owned books. I think he may have included something like that.
Yeah.
He definitely would have had to include something like that.
Mhm.
If it was beyond 6, was it 6 issues, right? Over the trade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, beyond 6 issues, you'd have to do that.
I think too, because I was trying to think if it did have a happy ending, I guess, you know what I mean? Like where he lives and he gets to have that like additional time with his family now being like having his memories back. I don't think it would have hit the same. I don't think he would have had the same feel, I think, emotionally at the end of the book. I think that what happened had to happen. And I liked how it was just like the story at I think it's the last few pages, it says something about like, you know, and then Deanna told her grandkids and then they told me, like it's like this family tale kind of thing. And I think that plays into what you were saying, Tommy, where like, you know what, maybe there in some reality it was all just a tale, right? Like that's those stories get passed down, but I think it is still kind of lovely that the magical mystical element is still there, right? He hasn't written in a way that it completely takes that out of the story, but I think it is again, like with the playing of the tales, I think kind of I could see where you're like second guessing it or like waiting to see if there's something else at the end, but
yeah.
Have you guys seen the movie Big Fish?
yes.
Oh, thank God.
I was just talking to Alana about the other day because she hasn't watched it.
Oh my gosh.
I've seen it so many times, but that's like this comic is Big Fish, but with giant swords is kind of the same idea. But like we remove Alzheimer's, remove the giant swords, add in a giant and miscellaneous old death. I think that's how the guy dies in Big Fish. Just miscellaneous. He is old, right?
Yeah.
It's probably more than that. It's probably like
there's something. Yeah.
consider now.
Well, I'm curious. I had a question for you guys as I was reading this, and you know, again, being that Donny Cates is all about everything is like hardcore heavy metal with like a little dash of emotion. I have my answer, and I'm curious. You guys, you can think about it for a moment, or if you have an instant answer. Being that this has been optioned for a legendary film, who would you guys like to see direct a live action version of this film?
Direct.
Direct.
I'd love to see Michael Bay ruin it. Absolutely trash it.
If they come out, if Geek Tyrant comes out tomorrow and says that Michael Bay is directing God Country, I will be very upset.
Everyone CGI robot, and Mark
Yes.
Wahlberg is playing the granddaughter.
Oh my gosh.
Actual answer. I'm trying to think of like recent really good action movies.
Yeah.
Because that's what it would have to be.
I was gonna
Can
say,
I
Chris, you must have one if you've thought of this.
Okay, so here's why I'm so excited about answering this question, because you would never ever hear me suggest
Like,
this
it's me.
director for anyone else, and I'm a known. I'm very harsh on this director for a lot of things that he's done, and he's been getting a lot of hype for a certain thing that he's putting out on HBO Max in 2021. So I think if and when they do the God Country live action, I would love to see Zack Snyder do a version of this movie. I feel like he captures that heavy metal with a hint of emotion in just about everything that he does, albeit sometimes not sticking correctly or looking at the wrong type of source material and pulling things from that. And hopefully with less gore, I would hope, if he does his story. But Zack Snyder in the way that he does action and everything, the grandness of his films, I think that he would do this film a lot of justice. No pun intended.
So there's a delay on this, but Chris in the chat said Zack Snyder literally as you said it. Like,
wow.
Like,
look at that.
Yeah, what if I win?
That's awesome.
Like, I'm wondering if Chris also thought he would be good for it, or if he just thought that that's where you were going with it. I'd be curious.
Chris, high five through the chat. Appreciate you,
right?
man.
Like,
Great minds think alike. Right? Yeah. So I don't know if you guys have anyone outside of that, but when I think of like action beats from this story, I think of like Sucker Punch or like Watchmen, like the slow motion.
Yeah.
Like everything is just over the top.
That's such a tough question.
It's like I go to Comic Cons, so I feel like out of my own safety, I should say it's totally Zack Snyder. He's the best. 100%.
We love him so much.
Even if he doesn't direct this movie, release the Snyder cut of God Country.
Yes.
Legendary.
I'm still stumped.
The better question is who should play Emmett, and the correct answer is Tim Allen in the Santa Claus makeup again.
I want to see like
I
would love to see Hugh Jackman as the grandfather. He's got that like jacked grandfather look going right now.
Yeah.
So I could totally see him doing that in like 10 years.
Or Tim Allen in the Santa Claus makeup.
You know what? You've convinced me. Correct. That is the correct answer. Tim Allen in his Santa Claus suit.
Yeah. And the elf cast from that movie. I don't care what age they are. They're all playing it.
Yeah.
Man,
they all swap in for the granddaughter. I was like, I can't even think of cast now.
I'm gonna quickly.
There's got to be rumors of like who is in talks to play certain things.
I feel like all the other ones besides Emmett are boring to cast.
Yeah, because it could just be anyone.
Be anyone.
Yeah, because they're not. But besides Roy and Emmett and the gods in the story, everyone else will be in the story for less than 10 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, and the gods are going to be CGI'd. We all know that,
right? If they're gonna do, I want Arstus, the god of war. I want him to look exactly like Steppenwolf, not from the new Zack Snyder image, but the old one from the one that came out a couple years ago.
That'd be good. I like the idea of doing it Lord of the Rings style with Gandalf, where they do forced perspective. So it's fighting him, but just from really far away in real life, and they're just he's just punching the air. They all react like 30 feet apart from each other. I think that would work really well. I'll send my notes to Zach when he gets the directing job.
Right. I'm telling you, if a year or two from now, when they announce that Zack Snyder's directing God Country, we're gonna be hyping this episode up so much and tell everyone that we called it.
And Tim Allen's starring.
Tim Allen is starring. Oh goodness.
That would open up a portal and destroy the world. I think some kind of paradox would happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny when thinking about God Country and the fact that we're only like 30 minutes into the episode. The interesting thing about talking about this story is, again, not really what the story or what happens in the story. It's more about what the story is about. which goes back to earlier when I was saying that if we've spoiled the entire story, which we have in certain elements, it's not important really. It's about the journey. And this story for me, I feel, again, being as small as it is and being as small yet epic, the journey of this 6-issue miniseries is one that I feel like has not been comparable to many, especially for only 6 issues. Who these characters are in the beginning and the growth that they have in those 6 issues is truly masterful by Donnie, and especially again at the point in his career that he did this is just incredible. And the fact that he and Jeff eventually went on and created maybe the greatest Thanos story of all time in Thanos Wins, and eventually did Guardians of the Galaxy together as well. And I think they're actually doing a new storyline here. They just recently announced an Image comic called Crossover, which I have absolutely no idea what it's about.
I don't either, but I did see that.
The team of Shaw and Cates are, really great. That God Country for me is what made me a fan of Donny Cates. And it's the reason why from here on out, since then, I've read all of his books.
So having read all his books, what would be the next one you would recommend if someone liked this one? I know we're getting into that early and we can jump back into the book. I'm just curious because you mentioned reading them all.
Well, I'll tell you. So my top 3 Donny Cates books of all time would be number 3 would be Thanos Wins. Again, going back to before Infinity War or Endgame, Thanos was this mustache twirling purple villain who had nothing on his mind but to please death and destroy universes. He had no depth to him whatsoever. And in Thanos Wins, the idea becomes, once you've done everything you've wanted to do, what do you do next? And Donny Cates has a really interesting idea of the end of the Marvel Universe. And Thanos Wins is another story where it's so incredibly huge. Everything is just over the top hardcore. But at the same time, in the corner over here during the whole story is a small emotion that you are constantly being brought back to for Thanos, and how and it's in my opinion, the core idea of what Thanos is, which is that he's never satisfied. He never will be. It doesn't matter what he does, whether he collects all the stones or he's the ruler of the entire, multiverse, the guy will always want more. That's just who he is. So Thanos Wins would be number 3. I would say God Country is number 2 for all the reasons that we've already talked about. Amazing story, self-contained, really emotional. And then number 1 for me, and I might be biased because Silver Surfer is actually my favorite Marvel character. Silver Surfer Black with Tradd Moore is just so original and thoughtful and thought-provoking, and everything about it just for me works. Even though again, I think it's only 4 issues or 5 issues maybe. But I just love that story so much. When I remember reading the first issue of Silver Surfer Black and just going, this is maybe top 2 or 3 my favorite Silver Surfer stories of all time. Just everything about it is absolutely amazing. And I know when I first met Donny Cates, the first thing I had him sign was my Silver Surfer trade. So yeah, I would say those are my top 3, and they are all exactly not exactly like God Country, but they all have Donny Cates writes very similarly in all his stories. He is, I don't want to say he's a one-trick pony, but he writes himself into stories, and who he is, in my opinion, is this very over-the-top, just in-your-face person who, if you were to sit down and have a beer or 2 with him, he would immediately open up to you within the first 2 or 3 shots. He's someone who wants to he doesn't care about the blasé and the small talk. He wants to get right down to the core of who you are. And he does that with the characters that he writes as well.
Yeah, I'm ashamed to say, is my first full Donny Cates story. I think I've read a handful of Thanos and a bit of Venom. But I just don't read as many of the superhero comics as are ongoing. Now that certain ones are collected, I want to go back. And I know Alana's read Baby Teeth and Redneck, I think, and she's said that they were just as good as God Country as well. So I know I definitely need to check out more of his work because I did enjoy this. And I think what you were saying with the one trick pony kind of term, those are some of my favorite writers, right? Is that I think if you like someone's work and then continuously put out the same kind of work, that's the best. As opposed to having someone that's trying to fit a certain mold or like trying to go with what is the hot book, like what's the trend in comics, I guess is a shitty way to say it, but you kind of understand what I'm saying, where there's
writing towards like a certain audience. They're trying to write for people instead of for themselves, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. It's when you lose the passion from the writer that the book falls flat, I think.
So I'm going to say this, and I hope that he'll never see this, but if he does, Scott, I don't mean this in a bad way, but I feel like Scott Snyder is kind of turning into that. He is writing for a certain group of people. I don't know if for a long time, again, huge fan of Scott Snyder, along with Kyle Higgins, going back to what we talked about at the beginning of the episode. Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's Batman New 52 run is the reason why I am so huge into comics now. It was part of my Wednesday pool. I'm a weekend, or not Wednesday, excuse me, not weekend. I'm a Wednesday warrior because of that run and because of a lot of other things that Scott has written. But I feel like as time has gone on, I feel like he's writing for someone who I have no idea who it's for. It's just over the top crazy, and there are literally no stakes whatsoever. And the best part about Donny Cates, in my opinion, is that Donny Cates is doing what I think Scott is trying to do, which is this over the top, what I've always wanted to see in comics type of writing, but where there's actually, a resolution at the end.
So I love when the creators get to work on their like passion projects. You know what I mean? Like the ones that they're like, again, like with Donnie and Thor, right? Like people are loving his Thor, and it's because he's so passionate about that character. And so, yeah, like when you find those touchstones with the creators, whether artists or writers, that there's someone, I think, and I mean, Chris mentions Tom King as another writer that kind of writes more, I would assume, writes more passionately, and kind of like his stuff consistently stays the same. But like with Mr. Miracle, right? Like, and on Mitch's episode, he talked a little bit about how that came to be, but both of them were given the opportunity to, like, what book do you want to do? And separately kind of came to Mr. Miracle. And then I think that's what kind of made it what it was, because they were both so in love with like that character, fascinated by like the backstory of it, and Kirby's incredible run on it. That's what made it, I think, what it is, and why that was so successful as well, right?
Yeah.
Back to Scott, I don't read a lot of his stuff, so I don't really know, but I can't think of someone off the top of my head, but I definitely know of works that I've read maybe one or two and been like, you know what, I really like this. I would want to check out more by so-and-so, but then lost interest in something else, just not feeling the same way. I mean, I read a lot of novels, as you can see my bookshelves. So like, I do feel that too. It's the same with novels, right? You find someone that's writing something that they love, and then they kind of jump off of that to see what's feeding, if it's vampires, if it's whatever, they're trying to fit that mold, that trend that's popular. Sorry, Tommy, I brought it back to Twilight, but you know what I mean? Like, I think with anything, like music, everything, like if you're passionate about it, it's visible, right? Even in words and stuff like that.
Well, and I think as consumers of media, we can tell if an artist is being genuine or not. Maybe I can't say that we always can. I don't think the masses, they say a person is intelligent, but people are stupid. I think for the most part, especially if we're a huge fan of that, person that's creating. I think another example, though, for me, Al Ewing and his Immortal Hulk run. In the beginning, I would say the first 12 issues, I was blown away. I was so happy that they finally took the Hulk back to his roots of horror. And it's this very interesting, kind of like self-reflecting story on Bruce, and just I loved everything about it. And then as time went on, it became this high concept science fiction, like, what are you doing, Al? You had this beautiful book and now you've turned it into this. And it's like, what is this even about anymore? And unfortunately, again, huge fan of Al Ewing. I'm not bad mouthing him at all, but I feel like he also at times falls into that same category of writes what he thinks people want to read and not what he actually wants to write. And I think that's the worst thing you can do, in my opinion. I think Brian Michael Bendis actually got into that rut as well there towards the end of his Marvel run, while he was at Marvel, he was on 39 books. So he was just writing what he thought people wanted to read instead of writing the Ultimate Spider-Mans or writing your Dark Avengers or the New Avengers or whatever, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Dang,
it's gonna
really
burn
means we
out.
can't get authors on here anymore. Like, hey, Brian, I just want to come on the Near Mint Book Club. And he's like, oh, I saw the episode with Chris where he said I wasn't as good as I used to be.
we need to just mark off Al Ewing, Donny Cates, Scott Snyder, Brian Michael Bendis. None of these guys are coming on anymore. Sorry.
No.
Speaking of Scott, I think I saw recently that he's moving away from DC to focus on creator-owned books.
Mhm.
So that's kind of an evolution in what you just said, I think.
I wonder if he saw the lines in the sand.
And they were also
I mean, I think even for the creators, there's probably some burnout and there's some probably pushback from DC, from Marvel, from, you know what I mean, where they're like, hey, you know, vampires are in, you got to start writing this, like, or whatever, you know, like, there's obviously, it's not all up to the creator themselves, but I think, especially with creators that are working, like you said, on like 39 books at a time, like I can imagine that there's going to be burnout, right? And you can only be passionate, really passionate about a handful of those, right? And then so other ones are going to kind of start to fall to the wayside. So it's like, what is that worth if you're not putting everything into the projects that you do care about?
And that's why I love writers like, you know, Tom King or a Donny Cates, because you never see those guys on any more than 2 or 3 books at a time. Purposefully, I feel, because they want to give those stories their all. And you know, again, not trying to badmouth Brian Michael Bendis. He's written more than, I mean, he's written more amazing stories than a lot of us could even imagine. But you know, part of the reason why he burns himself out is because he's writing 40 books at a time. It's insane. I don't even know how you come up with that many storylines at once. But you know, I really respect the guys like Donny Cates and Tom King who take a character and will rework it into something that they really enjoy and want to talk about. They'll take elements of themselves and put it into a character. I mean, a la Tom King and Batman, or even just from the couple issues that we've read so far, if I can point at it here, Adam Strange, you know, like he just takes little bits of himself, Vision even, and puts it into that storyline. And I really respect that.
Yeah. Tommy, go ahead.
I was saying, I'm almost surprised when I feel like I guess if I was wonderfully, if I was somehow in the position to pick whatever characters I wanted to work at on if I was writing like for Marvel or DC, I would try so hard to stray away from the big name characters, and I don't know why. Just because, like,
same.
I think there's just so much more room to do things with, like something like Mr. Miracle, where literally no one knew, or obviously people knew who he was beforehand, but only like the real comic people. And anyone who knows about him now that didn't know then just know him for the miniseries. And he was basically just big block of clay that Tom could do whatever he wanted with. And I think that would 110% keep like the burnout feeling away. It's just the ability to just do whatever you want with a character and not have to worry about what gets left behind or the baggage from beforehand. If anything, the baggage could just be a simple strength because you get like a couple volumes of like, I guess their Bible, of what you want to call it.
Every writer should do that, right? They should when they take on the daunting task of writing, say, a Batman or a Spider-Man, they should, and I don't know the inner workings of the business and what's required of them to cover in the storyline and how much they have to actually follow from the previous run, but you should use continuity as a tool, you shouldn't be a slave to it. So you should be able to take certain elements, like whoever ends up writing Batman after James and has the next big run, you know, Alfred will probably be back. Catwoman probably won't be involved. Like you should be able to make that character the way you want. And if we rely too much on continuity, oh my gosh, what are we going to like? We got to rely on all this other stuff and talk about it. It should be a fun little wink. It shouldn't be what you rely your story on.
Yeah, I feel that.
I think bringing it back to Donnie with Thor, even if you just look at the new Thor, he's Donnie's Thor. Like, you know what I mean? Like he's taken that character and made it the character that maybe not he's always wanted Thor to be or something, but I think like made it his own. He's put his own little flavor on him. And I think, sure, it could upset hardcore fans, and you're always, like Tommy was saying, those big characters, that's a fearful thing to take on, because just the fans alone are psychotic sometimes, right? Like it's
No, they're not.
What?
Oh.
I mean, I have characters I adore. I don't think I go overboard with certain ones and stuff like that. Like, I'm a big Thor fan. I'm not upset that Donnie did his own thing. What'd you say?
You have a giant statue of Jane Foster.
She's up here. One of these days, I'm just gonna like put her on her pedestal back here.
She can fill in for you one of the weeks for not in.
Yeah.
You know what, Mandy? That's an excellent point. Going back to the dauntingness of following up an iconic run. Think about Jason Aaron and his run on Thor. Probably the greatest Thor run of all time. Probably. And then with Donnie, when he took it over, did he even address any of it? I don't think so. I think he literally just went into his storyline with this, the Black Winter and becoming the Herald of Galactus. Spoilers, sorry for Donnie's run if you haven't read any of it. It's really good. Check it out. So, yeah, I think what Donnie has done with Thor is a great example of someone who can just take a character that they loved, having to follow up an iconic run, and just doing what they don't not acknowledge it, but also don't base your storyline around it.
Mm-hmm.
I think Chris had a really interesting story here. Or no, excuse me. He had an interesting question in the chat where he talks about. Go ahead, Mandy. Actually, I was trying to take over the show.
No, you read it. You go ahead. I have to move my microphone every time I read it. So.
He asks if you could choose to write one character, who would it be? So I know my answer.
I know mine. It's a really weird one.
Actually, go ahead, Tommy. I want to know yours.
I've been wanting to do this forever because I'm such a stupid theme park nerd, but I really wanted to write a Star Wars comic from the perspective of Captain Rex, not the one from Clone Wars, the guy who's in the Star Tours cockpit in the old version of it. He's just a little like robot voiced by Paul Rubens who's getting into some trouble, and I've always been upset that they haven't touched that, like the ride of Star Tours in the extended universe. So that's my answer. I want to do a comic from his perspective of being a little like airline pilot in the Star Wars universe and see the hijinks that ensue.
Oh my gosh. I would have never even thought of that.
I'm looking at my shelves right now to see if something can. The problem is that I'm so bad at answering these questions, but I think of the characters I love, and I have the fear. I'm like, I don't want to write I wouldn't want to write Jane Foster as Thor, or like Thor in general, right? Because like Jason Aaron's is like perfection to me. I don't want to add to that. I don't need to. I even am not the biggest fan of where it's going with Valkyrie, because to me, I was happy with where her story kind of came to. But yeah, I mean, you can go if you could think. I can't think of a specific character because I think I just have fear. I mean, I could pick. I don't know.
What character would you not feel bad ruining?
Yeah, exactly.
Who would I want to ruin?
Chris, who's your answer?
Well, if they've listened to our previous episode, I think a lot of people know, or if you just had a conversation with me, I'm first to admit that my favorite character of all time is Swamp Thing. And I know that Alan Moore, of course, created maybe one of the greatest runs in comics of all time with his run back in the early 80s. But since then, no one's been able to get a handle on him. Even the great Brian K. Vaughan couldn't write a good Swamp Thing story. So I think for me, and I think Swamp Thing fits in that same category as like, say, a Mr. Miracle, where he has an iconic run, but since then has not really had anything until Tom King and Mitch came and kind of revamped him.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if for some reason in a weird ideal world where DC said, "Hey, Chris Hacker, we want you to come to DC, write any character you want," I would immediately go Swamp Thing. That I want a 12-issue miniseries on Swamp Thing, and that would be my character.
That's such a good answer too. I'm like, now I'm trying to think of someone that maybe just hasn't had as much light. I mean, I think it would be fun to write Vision from the wife's perspective, maybe, because I feel like you're not in her mind as much. But I found, or even like the daughter, like the whole family was just like real fascinating, and maybe it's just that I want more of it. But also, I'd be way too afraid to take over after Tom. Like, no, thank you.
I think going back to what you said earlier, I think it would be really fun to have you write the perspective of Jane once again, reclaiming, because, okay, I would bet you guys both 10 nickels right now that at some point before we all three die, they're going to put Jane Foster back in the Thor costume and make her Thor once again, especially because it's going to be happening in Ragnarok in the movies.
Yeah.
So I think it would be really, really fun to maybe, now that Thor, okay, we're talking about right now, but years ago or years from now or now that Thor is the Herald of Galactus, obviously he's not in Asgard very much. Why not just put Jane right back in her spot? I don't know. I think that would be really fun to go back to that character because I love that part of Jason Aaron's run.
I think if you're looking at it where, yeah, if I could write, if you're asking me to write it right now, no. If I'm writing it 10, 15 years from now, where maybe she's kind of fallen to the wayside or someone's broken her story completely, then yeah, like I would love to be the one to revamp that for sure.
Absolutely. And people would go insane for that. They love, what's funny, quickly, I'm going to sidetrack here, but when I was a Wednesday warrior back in the day, when I was stupid and I was just reading Batman the whole time and I didn't really branch outside of, I would look at Jason Aaron's Thor every Wednesday and go, nah, I don't want that. But after reading it here recently, that part there with Jane Foster is some of the best writing from the All New All Different. Think back to the All New All Different Marvel and how people hated it so much. Think about all the great stuff that came from it. I mean, you got Ms. Marvel, you've got Jane Foster's Thor, you have Captain Marvel, you have the All New All Different Avengers. I still think those first 6 issues are really good with Mark. I think it was Mark Waid that wrote it. There's a lot of good that came from that. I just think that them leaning so hard into the All New All Different is what turned people off. It wasn't the actual material, it was the idea of it. Similarly to like the New 52 and DC, there was a lot of good that came from the New 52. It's just that the idea of completely revamping their entire universe turned people off.
I think they have the issue of going too far. Do you know what I mean? It's like too much, too fast.
Yeah.
And that's where you lose a lot of the fanboys and girls, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've had conversations with so many, this is a tangent, but yeah, I've had so many conversations with people that are just like, not upset that Jane holds Mjolnir, but like questioning it, right? They just want the facts. And it's just like, just let it be what it is. What is it?
Yeah, stop that.
Don't complicate it.
Yeah.
Ruins it.
So I'm to quickly take it back to God Country. You both, I know we're going back together.
Hey, welcome to Near Mint Book Club, where we go off on 10 million tangents.
So truthfully, I know we generally cover this in the beginning, but we just kind of got right into it. Did you guys, what did you guys think of this book? I mean, was it enjoyable for you? I know I purposely chose something that wasn't superheroes because you guys know that I love superheroes, and I wanted to do something that maybe the entire crew would enjoy instead of just me. So,
and then Alana's not here.
Right. So what did you guys think? Like, was this something that you would be able to recommend? Is this something that would you want to read more Donny Cates because of this?
I think I mentioned it briefly for sure. I've had this hard copy gifted to me for a while now, and it just kept sitting there because I was like, you know what? Not feeling what I think this is going to put out. But I was pleasantly surprised. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, it hit me in the emotions, and then that's where you got me. Those are the stories that stick with me, I think. So I definitely, like, that's why I was asking. I was like, if someone liked this, what would you kind of recommend in that realm? And so I definitely think I'll check out more of his stuff. I'm the worst too. It's just like I'm around those comics all the time too, and I just keep seeing them. But yeah.
Yeah.
I like this a lot. I feel like the tragedy of this is that I don't really remember all that much that happened because I feel like it was a lot of sword fighting and stuff. But it's definitely a story that I think the good sign of a story is that I can talk about more than just what the plot was. And there's like a cool depth to it that you don't get for every single comic. And I think that's kind of like the burnout comics that we were talking about before. Those are the kind of comics where it's just pure plot and there's like really nothing interesting. Like you can't really sell someone on it necessarily. It's like, oh, Superman punches. I like Superman, but it's like, oh, that's the plot. Is he big guy comes, he punches. Right. But like this one, since it has the emotional angle to it, it's something that like you can actually sit down and talk about and tell someone about it without spoiling it. You know, like I know some people who might not read comics but have had a relative that has had Alzheimer's or just any sickness that would kind of lessen the time together. And this feels like something that I can literally be like, oh, like this book talks about that. It has a lot of big violence and craziness, nothing gratuitous, and it's perfectly fine. But in the end, that's what this is about. And if you need, I like stories and books and things that in the end, when you read it, you go, oh, like, not every book when you read this, but like a book that when you read it, you're like, oh, someone else has been there and someone else like kind of understands this specific thing that maybe I felt or maybe my friend felt, so I could show this to them. And I think this book really has that, where just the core feeling of if I just had like one more day, or what would I do for one more day? I would trade my marriage to the devil and save my aunt or whatever. But
Spider-Man.
Yeah. Nearly that is shit. But you know, I really appreciated that this is something that we can actually talk about. And I think it's a straightforward enough read that you could just like hand this off to someone and get them into liking comics simply through this book.
That's a incredible point. And I think three people who are a fan of the medium, superheroes or not, or whatever, if we can hand someone a book who doesn't generally read comics, the medium comics, and we can hand to them and they can enjoy it, say like a Saga or something like that, like God Country. And that that could be like their stepping stone into it and show them that, hey, comics aren't just Batman and Spider-Man. That is incredible, you know, because I think if superheroes disappeared tomorrow, we would still have a billion amazing stories that we would never have run out of, you know? So
it's funny you mentioned Saga. I just bought that for my sister. I was visiting her. She lives like a few hours out of town. And every time I go see her, she has this small little comic book shop, like walking distance from her house. And I'm incredibly jealous. But so every time I go there, I try to stop in and just like buy a bunch of stuff. But this time, because she had read Umbrella Academy for us and wrote that article, she was just like, well, like, what would be another comic you would recommend? And I was like, Saga. Like, that's an easy, I think, you know, if you're into kind of like fantasy type stuff for sure. But I was like, you need to read Saga. She's like, are you sure? I was like, no, it's I don't know someone that doesn't like it. I cannot think of someone that said a bad thing about it. So
can I say that if I am so lucky to be on the Near Minute Book Club a third time, can I go ahead and just reserve Saga trade paperback #1? I want that to be the next thing we talk about, because
I would
first off,
talk about it.
I need to reread Saga anyway. So if you guys give me the excuse to do that, I would love that. But Saga is absolutely, like you said, Mandy, I've given that book to 3 separate people who don't read comics, never even thought about reading comics. And they end up, I think it was my best friend, Haley. I gave her the first 2 trades for Christmas one year. And a couple months later, I'd forgotten that I gave it to her. And I went back to her. I was like, hey, what did you think of Saga? She goes, oh, I'm all the way caught up. I bought trade paperback 7 like last week. I'm current. I'm like, that's amazing, you know? So
yeah. I think I've bought Saga for 3 or 4 people now. I did the same thing with Mr. Miracle, though. I was just like, here you go. Like, you need to read this.
You're going to love this.
I did the same thing for Mr. Miracle before myself. I've bought like 9 versions of it.
Yep.
I'm not stopping.
Yeah. So, well, what do you guys
I'm
think?
trying to read some of these comments. Tommy, can you see the comments easy? I have to keep moving my microphone. I placed it in the wrong spot. But I see
Thank
that
you
there's
for agreeing with me, Kelly. I feel like we haven't shouted you out yet. Hi, Kelly. Thank you for agreeing with me. You're my favorite commenter because you agreed with me.
If you want to be right on the show, you have to agree with Tommy.
Yeah, I actively kick people who disagree with me in the chat.
chatting them out.
Like, whoa, what happened? Yeah, we're getting close to an hour. So I think knowing how we work, if we don't do this now, or we'll go way over an hour. So if you like, we already said this before, but if you like this, Chris, what would you recommend? Not by Donny Cates, because you already did that.
Okay, so if you like God Country, can I recommend one other Donny Cates story that's very similar?
I said you couldn't.
Just one.
Okay.
Just one.
I was going to say earlier, and I spaced it because we started talking about my top 3, but Buzzkill by him, also an Image comic as well. It's basically about a superhero who gains powers through consumption of alcohol and or drugs. That's a really good. It's also another story that I feel like he put a little bit of himself into the story. He's, I think, 7 years sober now, which is really cool. So I would recommend Buzzkill. Speaking of Brian K. Vaughan, I think Ex Machina has not necessarily the same themes, but if you're looking for a book that isn't necessarily, I mean, it is superhero related, but that is not the focal point is not superheroes or like, crazy hardcore sci-fi. Ex Machina is a really, really awesome, like very thoughtful, very intelligent story that I think doesn't get enough love. Let me give you one more here.
Believe in you.
Let me just think here. I wish I had my bookcase is in there, so I have to like I'd have to like go out and look and come back. I would say another good story that doesn't require or is not superhero related, if you like something like God Country, would be Jason Aaron's Southern Bastards. Especially book 1 is really, really good. I think both him and Jason Latour have since they started Southern Bastards until now, they both have gotten extremely busy. So they put out like 1 issue a year. But I think it's up to issue 14 or 15. Southern Bastards is an amazing story. It's actually the reason why I started reading Jason Aaron's Thor run is because I read the Southern Bastards and loved it. So I would say, yeah, Buzzkill, Ex Machina, and Southern Bastards would be my 3 picks.
Cool.
I would recommend I think it's called She Could Fly by Christopher Cantwell. It was like
I love
really
Christopher Cantwell.
Yeah, I feel like not a lot of people heard of this book, but it is similar where there's like the underlying thing is this girl's like kind of like I think it's like a form of OCD that she has, but it's like
yeah, I was gonna say, is she OCD or maybe a mild autism or something?
Yeah, like I feel like it's a form of OCD that's like the most obsessive, I think. But it's like something that I think he said like he had suffered. I'm so bad. I feel like I read parts of him writing like why he was writing this book. But anyways, like this health factor, I think. But aside from that, it's the world sees this woman flying in the sky, and so it becomes this kind of like who is this woman, and like so like it has that like weird kind of magical aspect to it, but at its roots it's about this girl and this struggle that she's going through and like and like her obsession now with finding out about this woman and why she could fly. But it was a beautiful story. It's a little darker than I think I thought it was going to be as well, but it was lovely. And I think again, like that kind of like emotion with the more unrealistic side of the story, I think kind of reminded me of this.
I want to quickly say really quick, I love Christopher Cantwell. I think I don't really know what his history is with comics, but I feel like he's relatively new in the medium. And She Could Fly, I second that. Really great. He's currently writing Doctor Doom, and he'll be writing Iron Man. And those are Doctor Doom. I'll read it if my younger sister wrote it. I love Doctor Doom, so I would read it regardless. But him writing Iron Man, I'm so excited. I'm going to be picking that up every trade because Christopher Cantwell is, in my opinion, up there with like a Tom Taylor of some of the most. They're ascending in the Marvel in the comic world. They're currently doing some really great work. So I test that completely
for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tommy, did you have one?
Yeah. I think I always do movies, and that's the problem. Big Fish, if we talked about this earlier, that is just pure passing on your legacy, telling your story, et cetera, et cetera. That's about the only thing that's similar to God Country, which is fine. That's why it's a good recommendation. Another movie, I have a comic after this. Another movie is, this for some reason reminded me of A Quiet Place. I think just something about a family kind of going against the unknown and the confusion, all as like a team. And then John Krasinski, but older, would be a good Emmett in the movie.
Well, yeah, like the monsters in The Quiet Place is not the real issue.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, they are like the bad, quote unquote, bad guys, but the real story is the family and how they have to kind of deal with it.
Exactly. That's why it's a great recommendation that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And then, also, Chris, I feel like my comment to you in the chat kind of sounded like sarcastic and mean. I didn't mean for it to do. I was just saying that I'm totally tracking that there's another Mr. Miracle coming out. I'm probably gonna get it. just cause. What was the last one? Oh, and then this is me being absurdly biased, but Curse Words by this guy I know named Charles and Ryan Brown. That's just good if you like crazy magical fighting, and also it's really about family in the end, which I guess is kind of a spoiler to say because it takes a little bit to get into that part. But go buy it. There's an omnibus that just got kickstarted. You can get it on charlessoul.com.
God,
Link will be in the bio.
I don't get a commission on these, but I should. That's my recommendations.
Does Ryan Brown, does he do the covers for Curse Words as well?
Yes.
Okay, so he does covers and interiors, because every time I see Curse Words on the shelf, it immediately sticks out. It's incredible. The colors and just the art style is just amazing.
Oh yeah. No,
it's God Hates Astronauts. Is that his book? Yeah. He writes and does the art for that, and it's the same. It's that same bright, wacky, wonderful art that's just very him, but perfect.
I adore it. When we met at New York Comic Con, Ryan, as you remember, because you were there, Ryan was at the table with us, and I literally spent the whole weekend looking over his shoulder, watching all of his commissions that he was doing, because every single one, like for most commissions you look at and you're like in the very early stages, you're like, oh, that's Batman, and it's going to look beautiful in about an hour, and I'm excited. But for his, it's like, is that a guy with a crab head fighting a man with a meatball? And then later you'll find out, like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And you're like, cool, this is weird. I love it. So yeah, no, his art's fantastic and just beyond good. I got a commission from him recently. I'm still waiting for it though, but I'm be so excited for it.
I have a commission from Daniel Warren Johnson currently in the works, but I got that back in like February, so nothing yet, but I'm sure it'll be amazing when I get it. Yeah,
I think all commissions are at a standstill or slowly trucking along for most people.
Yeah.
You have strong opinions on that, or?
No, none at all. Kelly agrees that Curse Words is so good. I agree.
Buy the omnibus or any version of it. That's fine too.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that's about it for us this week. We've gone 6 minutes over, which is fun. We're killing it. We're ahead of the game. Yeah. Thank you to everyone that joined us. Chris, you can find him on Twitter. I think. Oh yes, his link in our description. So shout out to whoever remembered to do that. Cool. Yeah. Follow him on Twitter. Listen to his podcast. It's very good. I think you guys just hit 2,000 followers on Twitter, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Solid effort. I hope we do that one day. Yeah, everyone go follow him. Follow us because we need it more apparently right now. But follow Chris.
Can I share a little tip with that?
Please do.
All it is following a bunch of nerds, and then they'll follow you back. And if they don't, unfollow them, and then follow a bunch more nerds, and then see if they follow you. Unfollow them.
That's the algorithm.
There it is. We've broken the code.
To all of Chris's followers watching this, he doesn't care about you.
I have no feelings for you at all. I don't care about you guys. You're just a follow to me.
All right, man. Send us off. Yes. You don't know.
Yep.
It's not working today. Bye.
Now give us something. I have the button to end the broadcast. You have to give us something.
I have to give some. Alana always cuts me off when I think too long.
I'm in power. Alana's not here to save you this time.
Stay golden, pony boys.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Way to hit hard with that one.
Have a good weekend, guys.